I never thought I'd end up working at a place like this, a job at an abandoned hotel in the middle of nowhere. It sounded crazy when I first heard about it, but sometimes you just need to take a chance. It wasn't like I had a lot of options, so when the opportunity came up, I figured it was worth a shot. The money was good and I could use the break from my regular grind. Besides, who wouldn't want to try something different, right? The hotel had been empty for years. Tucked away in the mountains, once it was a grand place. People came from all over, staying in its fancy rooms, dining in its luxurious restaurant, but now it was nothing more than a ghost of its former self. I wasn't sure why it was abandoned, and to be honest, I didn't really care. It was a job, and at the end of the day, that's all that mattered. I had heard rumors, of course. People in the nearby town mentioned the place. But it was the usual small-town gossip, nothing concrete. It's haunted, they said, or there's something off about that place. But I didn't buy into any of that. I was here to work, not to listen to stories. The day I arrived, the air felt different. The drive had been long, winding up through mountain roads that seemed to stretch on forever. When I finally got to the hotel, I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't quite right. The hotel stood like an old mansion, neglected and left to time, with ivy creeping up the sides and the windows shut tight. The doors creaked as I pushed them open, and the smell of old wood and dust hit me immediately. It felt like stepping into the past, where everything was frozen in time. I walked through the lobby, taking in the heavy silence that hung in the air. No employees, no guests, just me and the empty hotel. It was strange, almost eerie, like the place was waiting for something. I wasn't sure what I had expected, but it wasn't this. The place had a certain charm, but at the same time, it made me feel uncomfortable. There was no denying it. There was a heavy presence here, something that felt like it had been here long before I arrived. I met with the manager, who went over the usual details of the job. He handed me a set of rules, simple ones, or so I thought. Keep to the schedule, don't wander off the property, and never go into certain areas. He said, giving me a quick glance, "The guests here are peculiar, so be polite and keep to yourself." It all sounded pretty standard. But there was something in his tone that made me pause. It wasn't fear exactly, but there was something in his voice that said there was more to this place than he was letting on. I shrugged it off. Rules are rules, right? And besides, I wasn't here for a vacation. I was here to work. It wasn't until later that night, when I was settling in for my first shift, that I began to question if I had made the right choice. The hotel was quiet, too quiet. The kind of quiet that made you uneasy, as if every little sound echoed in the stillness. I checked my watch, midnight. I was supposed to be on night duty, keeping an eye on things. There were no guests, no staff, just me. I decided to take a walk around the hotel just to stretch my legs. It wasn't a huge place, but the halls seemed endless. The place was built in the 1920s, and it showed. Old portraits lined the walls, faded and cracked with age. The carpet beneath my feet creaked as I walked, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. At first, I thought it was just the silence playing tricks on me, but the more I walked, the more the feeling grew. It wasn't just in my head, there was something here. The manager had mentioned certain areas I wasn't allowed to go. They were marked off with ropes and signs, but it was almost as if the restrictions were meant to be broken. I knew I shouldn't. But my curiosity got the better of me. I walked to one of the roped-off areas, the basement. The sign read, "Authorized personnel only." But who was going to stop me? I was the only one there. I hesitated at the top of the stairs, looking down into the darkness. The air smelled musty, like something had been locked away for too long. My flashlight barely cut through the thick darkness. I could hear the faintest sounds coming from below. But I couldn't tell if they were real or if my mind was just playing tricks on me. Slowly, I descended the stairs, each step feeling heavier than the last. I reached the bottom, but the darkness was suffocating. I couldn't see much beyond the beam of my flashlight, but I could feel something wrong. Then I heard it, a sound, a whisper, barely audible over the silence. My heart raced, and I turned to leave, but the door at the top of the stairs slammed shut behind me. The air shifted, colder now, as if the temperature had dropped several degrees in an instant. I tried the door, but it wouldn't budge. Panic began to creep in. Was this part of the rules? Was I being tested? I couldn't tell, but I knew one thing for sure. I wasn't alone. I wasn't alone in this hotel. I stayed there in the darkness, my heart thumping in my chest, unsure of what to do. There was something more to this place, and no matter how hard I tried to rationalize it, I couldn't deny that it felt like I was in danger. That night, as I lay awake in my room, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. The rules they gave me weren't just guidelines for the job, they were warnings, and I had a sinking feeling that I had already broken one of them. But what could I do? I had already crossed the line. Tomorrow night, I would find out exactly what those rules meant, and whether or not I would survive to see the morning. The next night, I found myself back at the front desk, a bit uneasy but trying to shake it off. The quiet was deafening. It wasn't the kind of stillness you'd expect in a place like this. It was the kind of silence that pressed against you as though the walls themselves were holding their breath. I glanced at the clock, 10:45 p.m. My shift was about to begin. I knew the drill: check the security cameras, make sure everything was in order, and keep an eye out for anything unusual. I did a quick sweep of the hotel. The hallway lights flickered slightly, making the old wallpaper seem like it was breathing. The hotel had a character to it, sure, but there was a weird feeling about the place. It was like something had been left unfinished, something lurking just beneath the surface, waiting for the right moment to reveal itself. I followed the usual route, walking past the front desk, the grand lobby, and into the back halls where the employees usually worked. As I moved deeper into the hotel, I started to realize how isolated I truly was. The only sound I could hear was the soft shuffle of my footsteps against the worn floorboards. The silence was almost suffocating. I couldn't stop thinking about what happened the night before, with the basement door slamming shut on me. I should have reported it, but something held me back. Part of me didn't want to sound paranoid, and another part just wasn't sure if I had imagined it all. But as I passed by the same roped-off area again, I felt that pull again, that curiosity I couldn't shake. As I stood there, staring at the basement door, something caught my eye. There was a slip of paper wedged between the door frame and the wall, almost as if someone had intentionally left it there. I pulled it out. It was a small note, handwritten with neat, precise letters. "Do not enter after midnight, keep to your shift, and follow the rules." I froze. The note wasn't from the manager or any staff. It was clearly a warning meant just for me. My heart raced, but I couldn't help the shiver that ran down my spine. The rules, they were becoming real, not just the paper with the do's and don'ts, but something darker, something more serious. I looked down at the note again. Keep to your shift. That's what it said. Was I really safe here? Or was this just the beginning? My mind kept racing as I walked through the hallways, trying to shake off the sense that someone or something was following me. I could swear I heard footsteps behind me, but when I turned, there was no one, just the empty stretch of the hallway, empty doors and shadows. My flashlight flickered briefly, casting long, distorted shadows that made the place seem even more surreal. I continued my rounds, telling myself that I was just being paranoid, but the fear wouldn't go away. The longer I stayed, the more it felt like I was losing my grip on reality. Like I was becoming part of whatever strange history this place had. Around midnight, the manager's words echoed in my head. The rules are there for a reason. I couldn't help but wonder what would happen if I didn't follow them, what was waiting for me if I broke one of these rules. I tried to push the thoughts aside, but I couldn't. I felt the rules weighing down on me more than ever. The hotel seemed to come alive at night, the flickering lights, the sounds of old pipes groaning, and the way the air would suddenly shift made it feel as if the building itself was watching me. When I checked the cameras, everything seemed normal, nothing out of the ordinary, but my gut told me that something was wrong. The quiet was unsettling, too calm. It made the smallest noise feel like an explosion. I headed up to the second floor to check the rooms. As I passed the hallway mirrors, I couldn't help but notice how still they were. The reflections were perfect, unnaturally perfect, as though they were frozen in time. But in one of the mirrors, just as I walked by, I thought I saw something, a shadow that didn't match my own. I whipped my head around, but there was nothing there. My pulse quickened. I had to be losing it, but I wasn't alone. I could feel it. Someone or something was out there. The hotel wasn't as empty as I thought. I reached the third floor where the real oddities began. There was one room. Room 303, that had a sign with a note attached. Do not disturb. No one had checked in, so I figured it was a regular sign from housekeeping, but the more I looked at it, the more it seemed wrong. The paper was slightly torn at the edges, like it had been there for years, but the ink was fresh. I gently tugged at the corner, pulling the paper loose, but before I could read it further, I heard a door creak open behind me. I turned sharply. The hallway was still empty. I was starting to feel trapped, like I was stuck in a loop. This was supposed to be a job, a temporary gig to get by, but the more I stayed, the more I felt like the hotel was trying to drag me deeper into its mystery. My shift was almost over, and I just wanted to get through the night without anything else happening. But as I stood there, staring at the torn note in my hand, I couldn't shake the feeling that my time here had only just begun. The rules were real, the warning was real, and whatever was behind the doors, hidden in the dark corners of this place, was real too. I looked around, hoping to hear the footsteps of another employee, someone to tell me I wasn't going crazy, but no one came. The silence was all-consuming. It was time to go back to the front desk, finish my shift, and pray that I could leave without getting tangled up in whatever nightmare this hotel was about to become. But as I made my way back down the hall, I couldn't help but glance over my shoulder one more time. The feeling of being watched, of something lurking just behind me, didn't go away. It only grew stronger. I was beginning to understand what they meant by the rules. They weren't just for the job, they were for survival. The morning came slowly, and I was grateful for it. The sun filtered weakly through the thick curtains, but it wasn't enough to wash away the tension that had built up in the hotel overnight. I hadn't slept much, just dozed off in fits and starts, each time waking up to the sound of creaking floorboards or what I swore were footsteps echoing through the empty halls. But every time I looked around, there was nothing. Nothing except the heavy silence and the oppressive atmosphere that seemed to settle deeper into my bones as the night wore on. The first thing I did when I got up was check the cameras again. I don't know why, but I felt the need to. Maybe it was some kind of compulsion, or maybe it was the nagging feeling that something was wrong. I scrolled through the footage from last night. No strange figures, no shadows creeping where they shouldn't be. It all looked normal, but the more I watched, the more I couldn't shake the feeling that I was missing something. I pulled myself together, took a quick shower, and got ready for my second shift. But when I walked back into the lobby, it hit me. The hotel didn't feel like a hotel anymore. It felt like something else. The once grand architecture, the beautiful woodwork, and the elegant details felt like a facade now. Everything about this place felt heavy, weighed down by years of neglect and dark history. I couldn't help but wonder if it was more than just the building that was haunted. Maybe it was the people who used to stay here, or worse, the ones who never left. As I walked through the lobby, I noticed something new. A piece of paper tucked into the corner of the front desk where it hadn't been the night before. I pulled it out. It was another note, this one in the same neat handwriting as the one from the basement door. If you break the rules, you will pay the price. It was vague, cryptic, and it made my stomach drop. What did it mean? What price? I folded the note back up and shoved it into my pocket, trying to push down the rising sense of dread in my chest. The hotel felt even quieter this time. The air was thick, like the place was holding its breath. My shift started slowly, just like the night before. I did my rounds, checked the cameras, made sure everything was in place, but the unease never left. It lingered in the corners of every hallway, in the spaces between each breath I took. As the hours passed, I began to notice more things that weren't quite right. The front door, which had been locked when I arrived, was now slightly ajar. Not enough for someone to sneak in, but just enough for me to notice. The elevator, which should have been idle, made a strange noise whenever it moved, like someone was riding it, even though no one was there. I decided to take a look. I walked toward the elevator, and that's when I heard it, the sound of footsteps, but it wasn't the sound of shoes on carpet. It was the soft shuffle of someone walking barefoot across the floor. My heart skipped a beat. I turned quickly, but again, no one was there. The hallway was empty. I was beginning to wonder if I was losing my mind, but as I looked toward the elevator, I saw something that made my blood run cold. The elevator door opened, and for just a second, I thought I saw someone inside. Someone tall, shadowy, their face obscured by the dim light. They didn't move. But the air seemed to shift, as if they were waiting for me to approach. I froze. My instincts screamed at me to get away, but I couldn't. I took a step forward, the only sound in the hallway my own breathing. The elevator dinged as if it was waiting for me. Slowly, I walked toward it. The lights flickered above, and the air grew colder as I reached the doors. I hesitated, my hand on the handle. This was ridiculous. I was just spooked by the silence, by the emptiness of the hotel, but as my fingers touched the cold metal, I heard it again, the sound of footsteps. But this time it wasn't just one set of footsteps, there were several. I jerked my hand away from the door, my heart racing. What the hell was happening here? I spun around, and for a brief moment I could have sworn I saw someone standing at the end of the hallway, a shadow barely discernible in the dim light. I backed away slowly, not taking my eyes off the spot where the figure had been. But as I reached for the door to leave, I heard it, the unmistakable sound of a door closing behind me. I spun around, adrenaline shooting through me, the door to the basement. It had shut by itself. It wasn't just a draft, it was as if someone had pushed it closed. And then I heard it, a voice faint and distant like a whisper carried on the wind. Leave before it's too late. I couldn't move. My legs felt like lead, and my heart pounded so loudly in my chest I was sure it would give me away. My breath came in shallow gasps, and every instinct I had told me to run, to get the hell out of there. But my feet wouldn't move. Instead, I stood there, staring at the basement door, knowing that whatever was on the other side was something I didn't want to know, something I was supposed to avoid. The rules were clear: don't go near the basement, but I had already crossed that line. I could feel the weight of the hotel pressing down on me, and suddenly I didn't know if I was the one who was supposed to be watching this place, or if it was the hotel that was watching me. I turned back toward the front desk, trying to shake off the feeling of being watched, but the silence followed me, heavy and oppressive. I was beginning to realize that whatever was happening here wasn't just about following the rules. It was about survival, and if I wasn't careful, I might not survive this place. The next few hours dragged on, but every moment felt like it stretched endlessly. The unease I felt in the pit of my stomach wouldn't go away. The hotel's quiet wasn't comforting anymore, it felt oppressive. I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. Someone was here with me. I kept telling myself it was just the stress, the isolation, the dark corners of my imagination running wild, but deep down, I knew that wasn't true. I stayed at the front desk for a while, watching the clock tick by slowly. Every few minutes I found myself glancing toward the hall that led to the elevator and the basement door. The place felt alive in a way that was hard to explain, like the hotel had a mind of its own and I was just a guest passing through. But there was no welcoming feeling in this place, no warmth, just cold, silent walls that seemed to hold secrets. Around 3 a.m. The silence was shattered by the sound of footsteps, slow, deliberate, echoing down the hallway. At first, I thought it was just my imagination playing tricks on me, but then I heard them again. It was unmistakable. Someone was walking towards me. I stood up, heart racing, and instinctively looked over the counter, but no one was there. My eyes darted to the cameras. Everything appeared normal, but the sound was real. It was coming from the long hallway behind me. I cautiously walked toward the source of the sound. My footsteps seemed to blend in with the silence, but the closer I got to the hallway, the louder the footsteps grew. I reached the corner and peered down, half expecting to see someone standing at the end of the hall, but there was no one. Just the dark stretch of hallway, the old paintings on the walls, and the dim light flickering overhead. I stepped forward, my breath shallow, trying to stay calm. But as I walked past the first few rooms, I felt a chill spread through the air. The temperature dropped noticeably, and I could see my breath. It wasn't like the coolness from the outside. This felt different. It felt intentional. I turned the corner toward the back of the hallway where the old manager's office was. The door was ajar. The light inside flickered on and off like it was struggling to stay on. I didn't know why. But something about the sight of the open door set my nerves on edge. I couldn't tell if it was the feeling of being watched or something more tangible, but the air felt thick, like it was pressing down on me. I hesitated for a moment, then stepped inside the office. The room was just as I remembered, dusty old furniture, a few papers scattered across the desk, but something was different now. The same note I'd seen earlier, the one warning me about the rules, was lying on the desk, unfolded this time. I reached out to grab it, but as my hand brushed the paper, I felt a strange static charge run up my arm. It wasn't painful, but it was enough to make me pull back in surprise. The note was the same as before, but there was something new written at the bottom. If you break the rules, you will not leave, ever. I stared at it, feeling a growing sense of dread in my chest. The message seemed so simple, but it hit me like a punch to the gut. What did it mean? Was this place really something more than just a job, more than just a hotel? I stood there, the note clenched in my hand, trying to make sense of it. The footsteps that had led me here seemed to stop, but I could still hear a low hum, almost like a whisper, just beneath the sound of my heartbeat. I felt it in my bones, something was watching me. I looked around the room, but there was nothing there, just the same old furniture, the same dust, and the same air thick with tension. I quickly walked back to the front desk, trying to push the fear away. I kept telling myself it was all in my head, that I was just tired and paranoid, but the more I tried to ignore it, the worse it got. Every creak of the floorboards made me jump, every flicker of the light had me on edge, and then, as if on cue, the lights in the lobby went out. For a second, I thought it was just a power surge, but as I reached for the light switch, the whole building seemed to groan in protest, like it was alive and fighting against the intrusion. The darkness felt deeper this time, more consuming. I fumbled for my flashlight, the beam of light cutting through the blackness. As the light flickered to life, I looked up, and there, standing at the far end of the lobby, was a figure. It was tall, but its features were indistinct, like a shadow that was a little too solid. I froze, unable to move, my mind racing as I tried to make sense of what I was seeing. The figure didn't move, didn't speak, just stood there in the stillness, watching me. I took a step back, my heart pounding in my chest, but the figure didn't move. Instead, the faintest sound reached my ears, a whisper. It was so quiet, so soft, but it sent a chill down my spine. Leave before it's too late. I didn't know if I was hearing things or if the figure had actually spoken, but I couldn't take it anymore. I turned and bolted down the hallway, not looking back until I reached the back door. The air outside was cold and sharp, but it didn't matter. I just needed to get out of the hotel, away from whatever was inside. I knew I was in too deep now. Whatever was happening here wasn't just a job anymore. The rules weren't just for maintaining order, they were warnings. Warnings that I didn't fully understand yet, but I was beginning to feel the weight of them more with every passing moment. As I stood there in the cold, staring at the hotel from a distance, I realized that leaving wasn't as simple as just walking out. The place had already sunk its claws into me. The rules, the whispers, the things I had seen, they weren't random, and somehow I was going to have to face them. It wasn't just about surviving anymore. It was about figuring out what this place wanted from me, and whether I could make it out alive before it took more than just my sanity. It's blurred together after that night. Every shift felt longer than the last, each one dragging me deeper into a sense of dread I couldn't shake off. The hotel, once just a place for a paycheck, had become something else entirely, a cage, a trap, and I was its unwilling occupant. No matter how much I tried to ignore it, the rules loomed over me like a dark cloud. I knew I had to follow them, but the deeper I dug, the more I realized that I wasn't just following the rules for the job, I was following them to survive. But that night was different. By now I had learned to avoid the basement, to steer clear of the rooms with the broken locks, and to never, ever stay in the lobby after midnight. The whispers had grown louder, more frequent, and I found myself constantly looking over my shoulder. But despite my best efforts, something had changed inside me. I wasn't just a passive observer anymore. The hotel had begun to feel like it was pushing me, testing me, almost daring me to break its rules. It was well past midnight when it happened. The guests, if you could even call them that, had disappeared into their rooms hours ago. The hotel was as empty as ever, but I could still feel its pulse, like it was alive and breathing, waiting for something, or maybe waiting for me. I was walking back to the front desk when I heard it again, the unmistakable sound of footsteps. But these weren't like the others. These footsteps were purposeful, deliberate. They came from somewhere up on the second floor, from one of the rooms I knew had been empty all night. My heart skipped a beat as I stood frozen in place. The sound of footsteps grew louder, closer. I could feel the weight of every second pressing down on me. There was no way anyone could be in that room, I thought. The whole floor had been locked up tight, but the sound kept coming, drawing nearer. I didn't know what came over me. Maybe it was the fear or the curiosity, or maybe it was something deeper, something pulling me toward the unknown, but against every instinct I had, I moved. Slowly, cautiously, I made my way up the staircase that led to the second floor. The hallway was eerily quiet when I reached the top, but the footsteps, they hadn't stopped. They were still there. Coming from the farthest room at the end of the hall, I could feel the hairs on the back of my neck stand up as I crept down the corridor. My flashlight flickered, casting long shadows on the walls. I could hear my own breathing, shallow and ragged, as I approached the room. The door was slightly ajar, just like the note had said. I paused, my hand hovering over the doorknob. Every part of me told me to turn back, to walk away, but I couldn't. Something inside me wouldn't let me. I pushed the door open and stepped inside. The room was dark, the air heavy with dust and age, but there in the far corner, something moved. I barely had time to react before the figure turned toward me. It was a man, no, not a man, something far less human. His face was obscured by a mask, but his eyes, cold and empty, bore into mine as if they could see straight through me. "You shouldn't be here," he said, his voice low and raspy. His words sent a chill down my spine. "You've broken the rules." I took a step back, the cold fear crawling up my spine, but he didn't move. Instead, he stood there, his gaze never leaving mine. I tried to speak, to ask who he was, but my mouth went dry. The only sound in the room was the steady thud of my heartbeat in my ears. "Leave now," he said again, his voice more insistent this time, "before it's too late." I couldn't breathe. My legs felt like they were made of lead. Everything in me screamed to run, to get out of there, but I stayed frozen, unable to tear my eyes away from the figure in front of me. He didn't seem to move, but there was an undeniable presence to him, something that felt both ancient and powerful. Then, just as suddenly as he had appeared, he turned away and walked toward the far wall. Without a sound, he faded into the shadows, vanishing like a ghost. I was left standing there, the room now empty, my mind racing with questions I didn't know how to answer. The door slammed shut behind me, the force of it knocking me off balance. I stumbled back into the hallway, gasping for air. What had just happened? Was I losing my mind, or had I just witnessed something real, something far darker than I could have imagined? I stood there in the hallway, staring at the closed door, trying to catch my breath. The whispers had stopped, but the feeling of being watched was overwhelming. I could almost hear the rules, repeating in my mind like a chant, "Follow the rules or you won't survive." I turned and ran, my feet pounding against the floor as I sprinted back toward the front desk. My heart was racing, my body trembling, and the weight of everything pressing down on me. I knew I couldn't stay here any longer. I had to leave, but as I glanced around at the empty hallways, the empty rooms, and the hotel that felt like it was closing in on me, I realized something. It wasn't just the hotel that was trapping me. It was the rules that controlled everything here, and no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't escape them. The air seemed to grow thicker as I made my way back to the front desk. The building had shifted, and it felt like something had changed. The quiet was no longer peaceful, it was oppressive, suffocating. I looked at the clock, 3:30 a.m. Time had lost its meaning here. The seconds seemed to stretch into eternity. I reached for the phone to call for help, but the line was dead. There was no signal, no way to reach anyone outside this place. It was just me, alone in this hotel, surrounded by its dark secrets. I glanced at the walls, at the old portraits that seemed to watch me, their eyes following my every move. The rules, I realized, weren't just written on paper. They were etched into the very fabric of this place, and I was beginning to understand that breaking them might cost me more than I could afford to lose. As I stood there trying to gather my thoughts, I heard it again. The sound of footsteps. They were close now, closer than ever. And this time, I didn't have to turn around to know they were for me. The footsteps grew louder, closer with every passing second. I froze, paralyzed by the sound. There was no mistaking it now. Someone was walking toward me, and they weren't trying to hide their presence. The sound of each step was deliberate, heavy, almost purposeful. I could feel my heart in my throat, thudding wildly against my chest. My legs felt like they were made of concrete, but somehow I managed to move. I stepped back from the front desk, my eyes scanning the dark corners of the hotel lobby, desperate to find a place to hide, to make myself disappear. But there was nowhere to go. The hotel, with its grand but decaying halls, felt like a maze, each turn more suffocating than the last. My mind raced through all the possibilities. Was it a guest, another worker, or was it something else? I turned, barely able to catch my breath, and made a dash for the stairwell. The footsteps followed me, fast, too fast. I was breathing hard now, the panic creeping up my spine. I shouldn't have done it. I shouldn't have gone into that room, shouldn't have broken the rule, but it was too late for regrets now. I had to get out. I had to make it out of the hotel, or else I wasn't sure what would happen. As I rushed down the narrow hallway, a cold breeze swept past me, despite the windows being shut tight. The air felt thicker now, almost suffocating. I reached the stairwell. But as I grabbed the railing and tried to push the door open, I found it jammed. I yanked harder, nothing. It was stuck. I pressed my shoulder against it, desperate, but the door wouldn't budge. The footsteps were closer now, just behind me, echoing in the empty hall. I turned around, my pulse racing, my mind screaming for me to move, to do something, and that's when I saw him. The same figure from before, the man with the mask, was standing at the far end of the hall. He wasn't moving, just standing there, staring at me with his dark, empty eyes. His presence seemed to fill the entire hallway, like he was everywhere at once. My throat tightened and I struggled to breathe. "You're not supposed to be here," he said, his voice calm, cold. It was as if he was stating a simple fact. He didn't seem threatened, didn't seem angry, he just knew. I took a step back, but the moment I moved, the figure took one step forward. A slow, deliberate movement, as if to show me that he was in control. I stopped. He wasn't rushing. He didn't need to. His very presence was enough to make me freeze. "I didn't mean to break the rules," I whispered, the words feeling too small, too helpless. "I didn't know. I thought it was just..." "Curiosity killed the cat," he interrupted, his words cutting through the air like a blade. "And it's going to cost you." I didn't understand what he meant, but I was starting to get the sense that I was dealing with something far beyond my control. This wasn't a warning. It wasn't just some creepy figure in a hotel. This was real. This was happening. "You should have left when you had the chance," he said, his tone shifting slightly. For the first time, I could detect something darker behind his words, something far more sinister. "Now you'll see what happens when you break the rules. You'll see how far it goes." I was paralyzed, unable to move or speak. His presence was suffocating. I felt like I was being drawn into the very walls of the hotel, becoming a part of it, as if I had already crossed a line that couldn't be undone. With every ounce of strength I had, I forced myself to speak. "Please, just let me go. I'll leave. I'll never come back. Just let me leave." But his eyes, those empty, hollow eyes, never wavered. He didn't respond right away. He just stood there, staring, watching me like he was waiting for something. And then he slowly shook his head. "You don't get to leave," he said, his voice dropping to a whisper. "Not unless you understand what's at stake. Not unless you understand what happens when you break the rules." Before I could respond, he was gone, just like that. One moment he was there, standing right in front of me, and the next he was gone, leaving nothing but a lingering coldness in the air. I stood there, frozen, my mind racing, trying to make sense of everything. Was it a warning, or was it a promise? A promise that if I didn't follow the rules, I would never leave this place, ever. The temperature in the hallway dropped even further. I could see my breath now, puffing in front of me in thick clouds. The lights above flickered, casting long shadows on the walls, and I felt it again, the sensation of being watched. But this time it wasn't just a feeling. It was real. I could sense it, hear it. Something was waiting, lurking just around the corner. I turned and bolted down the hallway, running without thinking. I had to get out. I had to leave. But no matter how fast I ran, no matter how many turns I took, the hotel seemed to stretch on forever. The halls twisted and turned like a maze, each door leading to more darkness, more confusion. It felt like the hotel itself was alive, watching me, pushing me further into its depths. I reached the front door finally. It was just ahead, the exit, the escape. I grabbed the handle, pulling as hard as I could, but the door wouldn't open. It was locked. The heavy weight of reality slammed into me like a wall. The hotel wasn't going to let me go, not now, not ever. And that's when I realized it. This place wasn't just a hotel, it was a prison for anyone who broke its rules. I stepped back, my chest heaving as I tried to catch my breath. The weight of the situation hit me all at once. I was trapped, I couldn't escape. No one would believe me if I told them what was happening. The rules weren't just there to keep the place in order, they were there to keep me in. And now, I was part of the hotel's twisted game. I had broken the rules, and the price was going to be steep. But the worst part, I had no idea what was coming next. The minutes stretched into what felt like hours as I stood frozen in front of the locked door, my mind spiraling. The hotel, its walls, and the empty corridors suddenly felt like a prison. It wasn't just the physical space, it was the overwhelming sense of something far darker looming over me, something I couldn't escape. I wasn't even sure how much time had passed when I finally turned away from the door. I felt an odd mixture of panic and exhaustion. Like I'd been running a race with no finish line. My legs were weak, my heart thumping in my chest. I couldn't breathe. There was no air in the place, or at least it felt that way. I had to keep moving. I wandered back into the hallway, still haunted by the figure and his warning. "You don't get to leave," he had said. Those words kept echoing in my mind, chasing me down like a shadow that refused to let go. I had broken the rules. Now I had to face the consequences. But what did that mean? What price was I going to pay for my curiosity? For stepping into places I was told to stay away from? The hallway seemed to stretch endlessly before me, like a labyrinth I couldn't escape. I passed room after room, each one more silent than the last. The air felt suffocating, thick with the weight of the unknown. My fingers tightened around the flashlight in my hand as I walked, its beam slicing through the darkness, illuminating nothing but more empty rooms. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. I stopped in front of one of the doors, room 206. It wasn't marked, no sign, nothing to suggest it had ever been used. It was different from all the other rooms I'd passed. The door was slightly ajar. Something about it felt wrong, too quiet, too still. I couldn't explain it, but I knew I had to open it. I didn't want to, but I couldn't stop myself. With a trembling hand, I pushed the door open. Inside, the room was small and unremarkable, just another standard hotel room with a bed, a desk, a dresser. The curtains were drawn and the room was dim, but that wasn't what unsettled me. It was the strange feeling in the air, the oppressive, heavy atmosphere, and then I saw it. On the bed was an old suitcase, cracked and worn from age. It didn't belong there. Everything about the room suggested it had been untouched for years. Yet this suitcase was placed neatly in the center of the bed, as if someone had been living there recently. I walked closer, my feet dragging across the carpet as I cautiously approached the suitcase. My hand hovered over the latch, my breath shallow. What was inside? I opened it. The moment I lifted the lid, I felt a wave of nausea hit me. The suitcase was filled with old papers with faded ink, letters written in a language I didn't understand. There were photos too, black and white, of people standing in front of the hotel, smiling in what appeared to be happier times. But there was something unsettling about them. They were all staring directly at the camera, their faces blank, as though they were staring into something beyond the lens. I flipped through the pages, my hands shaking. Each photo seemed more disturbing than the last, but it wasn't the images that made my stomach turn. It was the sense of familiarity. I couldn't explain it, but I felt like I had seen these people before, or at least their faces. Then I came across a letter. It was handwritten, and as I read it, the hair on the back of my neck stood up. The rules have been set for a reason. Do not stray from them. If you do, there will be consequences. We have all learned the hard way. None of us were ever meant to leave. My pulse quickened. The handwriting was different from the note I had found earlier, but the message was the same. Don't break the rules. Suddenly, everything clicked. The pieces I had been missing, the strange warnings. The figure who had spoken to me, this hotel, this place, it was more than just a job, more than just a creepy old building. It had a history, a dark history, and the rules weren't just guidelines for staff, they were survival mechanisms. As I closed the suitcase, a loud creak echoed through the room, followed by the sound of a door slamming shut somewhere in the distance. My head whipped around, my heart racing. I wasn't alone, someone or something was here with me. I rushed out of the room, slamming the door behind me. I couldn't stay there any longer. I had to find answers. The deeper I dug into this place, the more it seemed like there was no way out. The hotel wasn't just a place for guests, it was a trap, and I was caught in it. I didn't know who had left the suitcase or how long it had been there, but I did know one thing for sure. There was something about this hotel, about its history, that I hadn't been told. The rules weren't just to keep order. They were to keep something in or to keep something out. And I had a sinking feeling that I was about to find out what. I turned and ran, but no matter how fast I went, the hallway seemed to stretch longer, the shadows darker. It was as if the hotel itself was resisting me, pulling me deeper into its clutches. I could feel the temperature drop again, and this time it wasn't just the cold, it was something far more sinister. The whispers began again, louder this time. Leave before it's too late. I ran faster. My footsteps echoing off the walls as the whispers grew louder. I could feel the walls closing in on me. The hotel was watching me, waiting for me to break the final rule. And I didn't know if I was going to make it out alive. I didn't know how long I had been running, but every step felt like it was taking me farther from reality, deeper into the heart of whatever nightmare this hotel had become. I stumbled through the hallways, my mind reeling from the letter in the suitcase and the whispers that had only grown louder, more insistent. Leave before it's too late. It was clear now, this wasn't just a job. The hotel wasn't just a haunted building or some strange relic from the past. It was alive. And it wanted something from me. Maybe it had wanted it from the moment I walked through the front door. The rules weren't just there to keep things in order, they were designed to keep me here, to keep me trapped, to make sure I couldn't escape. As I sprinted down another hallway, I heard a noise that made my blood run cold. It was faint at first, but it grew louder, closer. A door creaked open. My pulse spiked. There was someone else in the hotel. Someone who had been watching me. I froze, my breath caught in my throat, and slowly turned around, expecting to see another figure standing there, like the man in the mask. But this time it wasn't him. The room at the end of the hall was slightly open, and from inside I could hear soft murmurs like hushed voices drifting through the air. They weren't clear enough for me to make out, but they had the same eerie tone as the whispers I'd been hearing all night. The same ominous, warning tone. I couldn't fight the pull of curiosity that gnawed at me. Someone was waiting for me in there. I approached the door cautiously, trying to quiet the sound of my footsteps. My body screamed at me to turn around and run, but my feet moved forward anyway. As I reached for the handle, I could feel the weight of the moment press down on me. What was inside? What new horror awaited? I pushed the door open. The room was dark. The only light coming from the pale moon filtering through the heavy curtains. At first, I didn't see anything, nothing unusual. But as I stepped farther inside, my eyes began to adjust to the dim light. That's when I saw it. The walls were covered with photos of the hotel, of the rooms, of guests who had stayed there. But they weren't just any photos. They were old, yellowed with age, and some of them had been torn and reassembled, like someone had been obsessively collecting them. Piecing together the past, what struck me immediately, though, were the faces. The guests in the photos all looked the same. They had hollow eyes, blank stares, and not a single smile in sight. It was the faces of the people who had stayed here, people who had disappeared without a trace, their names long forgotten, the very same people I'd seen in the photos from the suitcase. My heart pounded in my chest as the realization hit me like a ton of bricks. These weren't just old guests, these were the lost souls who had never left, and now I was one of them. As I moved closer to one of the photos on the wall, I saw a name scrawled at the bottom of the picture. James Walker. I blinked, unsure of what I was seeing. I knew that name. It was the name on the letter I'd found in the suitcase. Do not break the rules. Do not stray from the path. If you do, you will never leave. I had made a terrible mistake. I reached out to touch the photo, and the moment my fingers brushed against the glass, I heard it again, the footsteps. But these weren't like the ones before. They were louder, closer. They weren't in the hallway anymore. They were coming from inside the room. My heart skipped a beat. I spun around. There, standing in the shadows of the far corner, was the same figure I had seen before, the man in the mask. He didn't move, didn't speak. He simply watched me as if waiting for something, waiting for me to understand the full weight of my actions. I wanted to run. I needed to run, but I couldn't. My feet wouldn't move. It was like the hotel was holding me in place, refusing to let me leave. The silence stretched, unbearable. The man finally stepped forward, his heavy footsteps echoing in the small room. "You've broken the rules," he said, his voice low and gravelly. "You were warned, and now you'll face the consequences." I backed away, my mind screaming for me to get out of there, but my body refused to obey. I stumbled, my back hitting the wall. The coldness of it seeping into my skin. The man's eyes never left me. I wanted to speak, to beg, but my voice was trapped, frozen in my throat. "The rules aren't just for order," he continued, his voice growing darker. "They're for survival. You should have left when you had the chance, but now," he paused, his gaze sweeping over the room, over the photos. "Now you're part of it. You'll never leave." My breath caught in my throat. The weight of his words hit me harder than anything else had so far. I had crossed a line. There was no going back. I had broken the rules, and the price for my disobedience was going to be higher than I could ever imagine. Without warning, he took another step toward me, and then another. His figure loomed over me, his presence suffocating. The shadows seemed to twist and curl around him, closing in on me. I couldn't escape. I was trapped, and then just as quickly as he had appeared, he was gone. The room went silent again, the only sound my erratic breathing. I stood there, my heart racing, my body trembling, unsure of what to do next. I had come so far, but now it felt like I was deeper in the hotel than ever before. The walls, the photos, the whispers, it was all part of something much bigger than I had realized. The man's warning echoed in my mind. "You'll never leave." I wanted to run, I wanted to scream, but all I could do was stand there, frozen in place. I had broken the rules, and now I was going to pay the price. I stood there numb, my mind spinning as I tried to make sense of what had just happened. The man in the mask, he wasn't just some random person, he wasn't even a person at all. He was a reminder of something I couldn't escape, the rules. The rules were everything in this place, and I had broken them. I wanted to scream, to shout, to beg for help, but there was no one to hear me. No one would come. I was alone. And every door I tried to open seemed to lead me deeper into the hotel's suffocating grip. I was trapped. As I stumbled away from the photo-covered wall, my eyes scanned the room again, desperately searching for any kind of escape, but there was nothing. The walls were closing in on me, pressing against me like they were part of some twisted game that I wasn't prepared to play. I turned to the door. It was still open, but I didn't feel the urge to leave anymore. Something had shifted inside me. Fear. Yes, it was fear, but it was more than that. I felt a pull, an invisible force that seemed to latch onto my every step, dragging me back into the darkness. I stepped cautiously out of the room and into the hallway. The hallway that had once seemed so normal now felt foreign, like a maze, its walls pressing in, whispering things I couldn't quite hear. It was as if the hotel was alive and breathing, every hallway and every room a part of it. Its tendrils reaching out to trap me. I needed answers. I had to understand what was happening. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized there was no understanding it. The hotel wasn't just a place, it was a force that was manipulating me, drawing me into its web with every passing moment. I needed to find out who had left the warning in the suitcase, who had written the note, and why I was being singled out. And then I needed to leave. But could I leave, or was it already too late? The question kept echoing in my head, and with it came the chilling realization I wasn't in control anymore. I hadn't been for a long time. I turned a corner, heading toward the back of the hotel where I had seen the strange man disappear. It felt like a natural path to take, like the hotel was guiding me, nudging me in the direction it wanted me to go. As I walked, the silence seemed to stretch. Like the air was thick with something unspoken. And then I heard it again, the soft shuffle of footsteps, slow and deliberate. My heart rate shot up. The footsteps were too close now, too familiar. I spun around, but there was no one there, just empty space. My pulse thudded in my ears. Was it the hotel playing tricks on me again, or was something out there watching me? The footsteps continued, growing louder, but still I couldn't see a thing. It was as if the sound was following me, circling me, waiting for me to turn around. I took a step forward and the footsteps followed. I stopped. The footsteps stopped. I felt the weight of the air pressing down on me. As if the hotel itself was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen, and then from behind me I heard a voice. "You shouldn't have broken the rules." I turned sharply, my breath caught in my throat, but there was no one there. My eyes darted around, searching the empty hall. Nothing, just silence. The voice had been so real, so clear, but there was no one to speak those words. It was then that I realized something even worse. The hotel wasn't just alive, it was watching me. It had been watching me all along, observing my every move. The figure I had seen earlier, the man in the mask, he wasn't the only presence in this place. The hotel itself was alive, and it was aware of my every step, every decision. I turned back toward the front desk, where I could still hear the faint hum of the old elevator in the distance. The elevator. It had been moving on its own earlier, hadn't it? The hairs on the back of my neck stood up as I made my way toward the lobby. The thought of being trapped inside with no way to leave consumed me, but I couldn't let it stop me. I had to keep going. I had to find the truth. As I reached the lobby, something caught my eye, a flash of movement. I whipped around, but there was nothing there. Just the old armchairs, the flickering lights, and the sound of my breath as it echoed in the stillness. I scanned the room again, my eyes moving over the walls, the furniture, the air. But then I saw it, a door I hadn't noticed before, one that was hidden in the far corner of the room. I couldn't resist. Every part of me screamed not to go near it, but I couldn't help myself. The hotel had already hooked me, already dragged me into its mystery, and now I was compelled to find out what lay beyond that door. I crossed the room, the air growing colder as I approached the door. The handle was cold to the touch, and as I turned it, I felt the faintest resistance, like the hotel didn't want me to open it. But I pushed through, opening the door into what appeared to be a narrow, dimly lit staircase. The staircase led downward, deep into the bowels of the hotel. A part of me knew I should stop, but the other part, the part that had gotten me this far, told me to go. So I stepped forward, descending the stairs into the unknown. With each step I took, the silence grew heavier. The air felt thick and suffocating, and the darkness seemed to press in from all sides. The hotel was watching, waiting, and I was about to find out why. The further I descended into the depths of the hotel, the more I felt like I was stepping into another world. The air grew colder with each step, as if the walls were closing in around me, squeezing the breath from my lungs. The staircase, narrow and steep, wound down into the darkness, and with every creak of the wooden steps beneath my feet, I felt more and more like I was being drawn into something I couldn't escape. I kept telling myself that it was just my nerves, that I was overthinking everything, but the hotel wasn't letting me off that easy. The silence was thick, suffocating, and the shadows cast by the flickering light seemed to move, to shift, as though they were alive, watching me. I reached the bottom of the stairs, and the door in front of me stood ajar. Unlike the other rooms in the hotel, this door felt different. It felt like a boundary I wasn't supposed to cross, a line that should never have been drawn. Yet I had come this far. And there was no turning back. Curiosity pushed me forward. I pushed the door open and stepped inside. The room was large, far larger than I'd expected. It was dimly lit by a few low-hanging bulbs, their yellow glow casting eerie shadows across the walls. The space smelled damp, musty, like something had been locked away in here for far too long. There were rows of old filing cabinets against the far wall, some of the drawers half open, as if someone had been searching through them recently. The walls were lined with old photographs and papers, some framed, others simply tacked up with rusted nails. I could feel the weight of the room pressing down on me like it was full of secrets waiting to be uncovered, yet the more I looked, the more I realized that the room itself seemed empty, like it was waiting for something. I walked over to the nearest set of cabinets, drawn to them like I had no control over my own actions. My hands shook as I opened the top drawer, my heart pounding in my chest. The drawer was filled with old records, but not the kind you might find in a normal office. These were personal accounts, notes, and reports. Some of the names were familiar, names from the photographs in the upstairs hallway, faces I had seen in the old suitcase. The same blank stares, the same hollow eyes. The more I read, the more I began to understand. These were not ordinary documents. They were accounts of people who had stayed in the hotel, people who had vanished, who had broken the rules. But there was something disturbing about them. They weren't just reports, they were confessions. Each one described how the person had strayed from the path, how they had broken the rules of the hotel, and each account ended with the same chilling message: they never left. The last document in the drawer was different. It was a letter, written in the same handwriting as the warning I had found earlier in the basement. I read it aloud to myself, my voice trembling in the silence of the room. "You are not the first. Others have come before you, all of them drawn here by curiosity. But the hotel has its rules. If you break them, there is no escape. The hotel will keep you, it will take you, and you will never leave." My stomach twisted, and I could feel the blood draining from my face as I realized the truth. The people in the photos, the faces I had seen, they hadn't just disappeared. They were trapped like me. I could hear the faintest sound, footsteps, distant, echoing in the hallway outside. I wasn't alone down here. Someone or something was moving in the darkness. My heart skipped a beat. I turned quickly, scanning the room. That's when I saw it, a figure standing in the far corner watching me. At first I thought it was just another shadow, but as my eyes adjusted to the dim light, I saw that it wasn't. It was a person, a man, wearing a suit that looked as old as the hotel itself. His face was obscured by shadows, but there was no mistaking the coldness in his eyes. He didn't move, didn't speak, he just stood there watching me. I froze. The air around me grew heavier, thicker, and the temperature seemed to plummet even further. I couldn't move. My legs felt like they were made of stone, and for the first time since I'd entered the hotel, I was genuinely afraid. I wanted to scream, to run, but the figure didn't seem to want anything from me, not yet. His presence was enough to paralyze me. The weight of the hotel's rules, the consequences of my disobedience, all seemed to come crashing down at once. "You're not supposed to be here," he said, his voice low and hollow, like it came from the depths of the earth. I opened my mouth to respond, but no words came out. It was as if the hotel itself had stolen my voice, leaving me silent and vulnerable in front of this stranger. I had broken the rules, and now I was paying the price. "You've crossed the line," the figure continued, his voice steady, almost monotone. "And now you will face the consequences." He didn't have to say it, I already knew. The moment I stepped into this place, I had sealed my fate. The hotel had a hold on me now, and there was no escape. no way out. And then, as if to confirm my worst fear, the door behind me slammed shut. The room was no longer just a room, it had become a cage. I had come here looking for answers, but now I understood the horrible truth. There were no answers, just rules. And the hotel's rules were absolute. "You will stay," the figure said again, his voice now almost a whisper, just like the others. "Forever." The walls seemed to close in on me, the weight of the hotel pressing down on me with a force that made it hard to breathe. The shadows in the corners of the room seemed to stretch toward me, wrapping around me, and I felt the last bit of my will being crushed under the weight of the rules. I had broken the rules, and now there was no way out. I could feel the walls closing in, the weight of the hotel pressing down on me like a suffocating force. The air was thick, colder now, and my breath came in shallow gasps. The figure in the corner hadn't moved, but I could feel his presence, like he was everywhere in the room, watching me, waiting for something. My heart pounded in my chest, my pulse racing as I tried to process what had just happened. "You will stay just like the others, forever." His words echoed in my mind, repeating over and over. I was trapped. There was no way out, not unless I followed the rules. But what happened if I didn't? What was the price for breaking them? I wanted to scream, to run, but my body refused to obey. My legs were heavy, like they were stuck in cement, and my thoughts were jumbled, spinning faster than I could keep up. I kept telling myself that this was just fear, just my mind playing tricks on me, but I knew better. The rules were real, the consequences were real. I had already broken them. The man in the mask, the warnings, the whispers, it wasn't just superstition or paranoia. This hotel, its rules, they were alive. They had a power over me, and I was beginning to understand that it was a power I couldn't fight. I turned back to the door. The cold handle bit into my hand as I tried again to turn it, but it was locked tight. No escape. The hotel was holding me in place, as if daring me to try again, but I didn't try. I knew it was pointless. I had tried to leave before, and the doors had closed behind me. I was a prisoner here, just like the people in those old photographs. A sudden crash made me jump. I whipped my head around, searching the room, but there was nothing. Nothing except the figure, still standing motionless, his eyes cold and unblinking. I felt a chill run through me, deeper than the cold air that had been creeping in. My mind raced as I tried to understand. The rules weren't just about maintaining order, they were about survival. They were about staying alive in a place that would take everything from you if you broke them. I looked back at the walls, at the photographs, at the old reports and letters scattered across the desk. I had seen the names before. The faces were familiar. Faces of people who had walked these halls, stayed in these rooms, and disappeared without a trace. Some of them, I realized, looked like they had been here for decades. And I couldn't shake the feeling that if I stayed here long enough, I'd be another face in one of those pictures. Another name on a report, lost to the hotel's twisted rules. I took a deep breath, trying to steady my nerves. There had to be a way out. There had to be a way to break free, but I couldn't think straight. The weight of the hotel's presence was making it harder to breathe, harder to focus. I turned my back on the figure, still frozen in place, and walked toward the desk. The letter I had found earlier still lay there, its words burned into my memory. "You will never leave." It was a sentence that haunted me. A sentence that felt like the truth, like the final verdict on my life in this place, but something inside me snapped. I couldn't just accept this. I couldn't let this hotel win. I had to find a way to break the cycle, to escape whatever holded it on me. I picked up the letter from the desk, my hands shaking, and read it again. There had to be something I was missing. Maybe there was a way to outsmart the hotel, to break its hold. I wasn't going to let it consume me like it had done to the others, not without a fight. As I stood there staring at the letter, the room grew darker, the shadows stretching longer. The whispers began again, softer this time, like distant murmurs. I could barely make them out, but they were there, always there, crawling in the back of my mind. "Leave, you're not meant to stay." Voice was different this time, softer, almost pleading. I didn't know if it was real or just my mind breaking down under the pressure, but I had to ignore it. I had to stay strong. I had to push through. I looked around the room, trying to find something that could help me. My eyes landed on the old filing cabinets in the corner, and a wave of realization hit me. What if the answers were right there, hidden in the same files that had been left behind by those who came before me? Maybe they had figured out something I hadn't, a way to escape. I walked over to the cabinets, my fingers brushing against the cold metal as I pulled open the first drawer. It was filled with papers, stacks of them. I began flipping through them, but most of the pages were damaged or too old to read. My frustration grew, but I couldn't stop. I had to find something. I had to know what had happened to the others, how they had ended up trapped here just like I was. And then, there it was. Folder thicker than the rest with a name on the front. James Walker, the same name from the letter, the same name I had seen in the photos. I opened the folder, my hands trembling. Inside were more papers, more reports, but one thing stood out, a single letter handwritten like the others. This one was different though. It was dated a few years ago and it wasn't like the others. This one was a confession. I didn't believe the rules at first, but they are real. I broke them and now I'm paying the price. The hotel doesn't just trap you, it owns you. It doesn't let you leave. And if you break the rules, it'll make sure you never get out. I don't know if I'll make it, but if you're reading this, you still have a chance. Don't break the rules. I felt the blood drain from my face as I read those words. James Walker had broken the rules and now he was gone. But what did that mean for me? What did it mean for everyone else who had stayed here? I couldn't ignore it anymore. The rules weren't just a means of control, they were a way of survival. And the longer I stayed, the more I realized that if I wanted to survive, I had to follow them. I had no choice, but there was one rule I hadn't broken yet. I hadn't gone back to the basement. Maybe it was time to see what was down there. Maybe, just maybe, that was the key to ending all of this, but I had to be careful. I had to play by the rules if I wanted to make it out alive. I couldn't shake the feeling that everything I'd learned so far was just the tip of the iceberg. Each discovery only seemed to lead to more questions, more unexplainable events, and more chilling realizations about the hotel and its dark grip on everyone who entered. The deeper I went, the more I understood that the rules weren't simply a set of guidelines to keep things in order. They were barriers, designed to keep the hotel's true nature hidden. But I had already crossed the line, broken the rules. I had seen enough to know that whatever lay ahead was something I couldn't ignore. The basement, the place I had been warned about since the beginning. It was always off limits, the only place in the entire hotel that had remained a mystery, a forbidden zone that seemed to hold the answers to everything. And now I had no choice. I had to go down there. I stood at the top of the stairs that led to the basement. The air growing colder the closer I got to the door. It felt like the hotel itself was holding its breath, waiting for me to make my move. I could hear my heartbeat in my ears, loud and frantic. I had already broken the rules. I was already in too deep. But this was different. Going into the basement wasn't just about curiosity anymore. It was about survival. The whispers, the warnings, the figure in the mask, they had all led me to this moment. Deep breath, I pushed open the door. The staircase leading down was narrow and steep, the old wood creaking underfoot as I descended. The smell of mildew and decay was overpowering, and the dim light from above barely cut through the darkness. As I moved further down, I felt like I was descending into something far worse than I could ever imagine. The walls were lined with old, peeling paint, and the air was thick with the weight of something heavy, something that had been buried for too long. I reached the bottom of the stairs and paused. The room before me was dark, its edges blurred in the shadows. I couldn't see anything clearly, but I could feel the oppressive presence of the space. Something was down here, and it wasn't just the hotel. As I took a tentative step forward, a soft click echoed through the silence. My heart skipped a beat, and I froze, the sound of a lock being undone. The basement door slammed shut behind me, the sudden noise making my breath catch in my throat. I tried to turn back, but the door wouldn't budge. I tugged at the handle, my panic rising, but the door remained locked. I was trapped. Again, but this time I knew I had no choice but to face whatever lay ahead. I couldn't turn back now. The room ahead of me was still eerily quiet. I took a deep breath and walked deeper into the space. The shadows seemed to stretch longer, as though the walls themselves were alive, watching me, closing in with every step I took. As I moved forward, I saw something glimmer in the dim light. A figure faintly visible against the far wall. My heart thudded in my chest, but I forced myself to move closer. The closer I got, the clearer the figure became, and my stomach twisted with a mix of fear and disbelief. It was a painting. A large, ornate frame hung on the wall, its edges worn with age. The painting was a scene of the hotel, but not the hotel I knew. This was a version of the hotel from years ago, before it was abandoned, when it was still alive with guests and staff. The scene was vibrant, full of color, but as I examined it more closely, something felt off. In the foreground, a group of people stood smiling in front of the hotel, but their faces weren't normal. They were blank, their eyes hollow, as if they were staring at something just beyond the frame. The longer I looked at them, the more unsettling they became. It wasn't just their eyes, it was their posture, the way they stood frozen in time. They didn't look alive, they didn't look like people who had ever truly been here. Suddenly, I felt the presence behind me again, the sensation of being watched, of something closing in. I spun around, my flashlight trembling in my hand. The basement was still empty. There was no one else in the room with me, but the feeling remained, the weight of being observed, of being trapped in a space that wanted to keep me. I turned back to the painting. And that's when I noticed something even stranger, a figure not in the scene but right next to it. A shadowy outline, almost like a ghost, standing just behind the people in the picture. I couldn't make out its features, but I could feel its presence, dark and looming. It wasn't part of the painting, but it was drawn into it like it was part of the hotel's history, its curse. My hands shook as I moved closer to the frame, my mind racing to process what I was seeing. What was this? Why was this hidden down here? I reached up to touch the painting, my fingers trembling. The moment my hand brushed the frame, the temperature in the room plummeted. I gasped as I felt a coldness seep into my skin, deeper than any chill I had felt before. The shadows in the room seemed to come alive, swirling around me. My vision blurred and I could feel myself being pulled into the painting, drawn into the scene with those hollow-eyed figures. I tried to pull back, but the air around me was thick, like it was holding me in place. The voice came again, soft, whispering like it was inside my head. "You shouldn't have come, you broke the rules, and now you'll stay." I screamed, stumbling back away from the painting, my body convulsing with fear. I tried to push past the shadows, but they closed in around me, pulling me deeper into the darkness. I could hear the whispers growing louder, more frantic, like a chorus of voices trapped in this place, all telling me the same thing. "You'll never leave, you'll never leave." I couldn't breathe. I couldn't think. I was suffocating under the weight of it all. The rules, the warnings, the eyes of those people in the painting, they all pointed to the same thing. This hotel wasn't just holding me, it was consuming me. I tried to break free to fight back, but it was no use. The walls were closing in, the darkness swallowing me whole. The hotel had claimed me and there was no way out. And then, just when I thought I couldn't take it anymore, everything went silent. The shadows stopped moving, the whispers stopped. I was left in total darkness, unable to move, unable to breathe. I didn't know how long I stayed there, frozen, trapped in the silence. But when I finally came to, I was no longer alone. The silence that followed felt endless, like I had been swallowed whole by the darkness of the basement. My body remained frozen, my mind unable to process what I had just seen, what I had just experienced. The painting, the figure in the shadows, the whispers, it all felt like a nightmare, but everything about the air in this basement told me it was real. The chill that still gripped my skin, the cold seeping deeper into my bones, was a constant reminder of how far gone I was. I didn't know how much time had passed, minutes, hours. My sense of reality had become warped, and all I could focus on was the suffocating silence surrounding me. I tried to move, but my legs felt like lead. The air was too thick, the weight of it pressing down on my chest. Every time I tried to breathe, I could taste the musty, stale air that filled the basement. I had to leave. I had to escape. But the walls of this place were closing in on me, and the door to freedom seemed further away than ever. My heart was still pounding in my chest as I forced my body to move, pushing through the overwhelming feeling of dread that gripped me. I stumbled back toward the stairs, but before I could make it to the top, I heard a sound, a soft shuffle just behind me. I turned quickly, but there was nothing. Just the same dark corners, the same dust-laden air. But then, I saw something new, a door, one I had never noticed before, standing slightly ajar. It had been hidden in the shadows, its presence only now becoming apparent as I looked more closely. I should have turned back, I should have ignored it, but my curiosity, my fear, my desperation, all of it pushed me forward. I stepped toward the door, my hands shaking as I reached for the handle. It turned easily, creaking as it opened, revealing another dark room beyond. This room was even darker than the basement, but it felt different, as though it had been sealed off from the rest of the hotel for a reason. The air felt colder here, as if time itself had been frozen in this place. Inside, the room was bare except for a single item in the center, a large old mirror. It was framed in gold, ornate and beautiful, but cracked in places. The glass reflected nothing but the shadows, twisted and warped, as though the mirror itself was bent under the weight of the hotel's curse. But I could feel it. Something was inside it, something beyond reflection. I stood frozen, staring into the glass, unable to look away, and then it happened. The reflection in the mirror shifted. It wasn't me that I saw anymore. The face staring back at me wasn't mine. It was a woman gaunt with hollow eyes, her face twisted into an expression of despair and fear. She reached out, her hand pressed against the glass as if begging for help. Her eyes locked onto mine, and in that moment I knew she had been here just like me, trapped in the hotel, trapped by the rules. I staggered back, but the image in the mirror didn't fade. The woman's reflection moved, her mouth opening, but no sound came out. The glass vibrated like something was trying to break through. I stumbled backwards, my heart racing. I turned and ran from the room, slamming the door shut behind me, but the feeling of the woman's gaze lingered, burning into my mind. She wasn't just a reflection, she was real. She had been here. She had broken the rules just like me. I needed answers, the painting, the whispers. The mirror, all of it had to mean something. There was a story here, a history buried deep beneath the surface of this hotel, a history that had been hidden for a reason. I ran back up the stairs, each step heavier than the last, my mind swirling with questions. Who was she, what had happened to her, and how was she connected to the hotel? When I reached the first floor, I didn't stop. I kept running back to the front desk, where I hoped to find something that could explain it all. My hands were trembling, my body drenched in sweat, and the weight of what I had just seen pressed on me like 1,000 pounds. I found the dusty old books behind the counter, the ones I had ignored earlier. They were filled with the hotel's history, its rise, its fall, its renovations. But as I flipped through the pages, one book caught my eye. It was old, bound in leather, and it looked out of place among the others. I pulled it out, my heart pounding as I cracked it open. Inside, there were names, the same names I had seen in the photos and the files, but there was more, dates, events, and a chilling pattern. Each person had stayed in the hotel, and each one had broken the rules. The book was filled with entries like some sort of journal, and the entries grew darker and darker as I read. The people in the photos had all been guests who had disappeared after breaking the rules. Some of them had tried to escape, some had stayed. But none of them had ever left. I turned to the last page. The hotel has claimed them all. It will claim you too. Once you break the rules, there's no escape. The hotel will keep you forever. I slammed the book shut, my mind racing. There it was again, the truth. The rules weren't just to keep order, they were a trap designed to claim anyone who dared to break them, and now I was part of that trap. I looked around at the hotel. It wasn't just the building that was alive, it was everything inside it, the people, the memories, the rules that bound them all together. And as I stood there in the lobby, the full weight of the hotel's power crashed down on me. I had made my choice when I stepped into this place. I had already broken the rules, and now there was no way out. The hotel would claim me just like it had claimed all the others. I felt like I was drowning in the realization. The weight of it pressed down on me, suffocating, crushing every ounce of hope I'd once had. The walls of the hotel seemed to close in tighter, and the air grew colder, heavier with each passing moment. My vision blurred, the lines between reality and the horrors I had uncovered beginning to melt away. I wasn't sure what was real anymore. The journal had revealed the truth. The hotel was alive, its rules absolute. No one who had broken them had ever left. I had crossed the line the moment I stepped through those doors, and now I was bound to the hotel, as much a part of it as the walls and the floor. There was no escape. I couldn't help but replay everything in my mind, the warnings, the whispers, the figure in the mask. They had all been trying to tell me the same thing. The hotel doesn't let you leave. I had thought I could fight it. I had thought that if I just kept looking for answers, I could break free, but now I understood that I had been a fool. The answers were never meant to set me free. They were meant to draw me deeper into the hotel's web, to make sure I would stay forever. I backed away from the front desk, the realization gnawing at me like a hunger I couldn't ignore. My heart pounded in my chest, my hands shaking as I tried to hold on to some shred of control, but there was nothing left to hold on to. The hotel had already claimed me. And as the minutes ticked by, I felt it more acutely, like I was sinking into quicksand, the hotel's power pulling me down further. I thought of the basement, the door that had slammed shut behind me, trapping me inside. I thought of the woman in the mirror, her eyes hollow and empty, reaching out for help. She had been trapped just like me, and now I knew what had happened to her. She had tried to leave, to break the rules, and she had paid the price. But I couldn't stop myself. I had to know more. I had to understand how this place worked, how it fed on the souls of those who entered, drawing them in, keeping them forever. I had to know if there was any chance of escape, any hope left at all. I turned and began walking toward the stairs again, each step feeling heavier than the last. I knew what I had to do. I had to confront the heart of the hotel, the place where it all began, the basement, the one place I hadn't fully explored. The place where the truth waited to be uncovered. The stairwell was dark, the air colder the farther I descended. I wasn't sure if it was the temperature or the weight of the hotel's power pressing down on me, but I could feel it in my chest. The deeper I went, the more suffocating it became. I could barely breathe. When I reached the bottom, the basement stretched out before me like a labyrinth, twisting and turning with no clear end. The walls were lined with old, rusted pipes, and the floor was damp, slick with mildew and decay. It felt like I had stepped into the bowels of the hotel, into its very soul. I took a deep breath and moved forward, my flashlight the only source of light. The air was thick with the smell of rot, and every footstep I took echoed off the walls, amplifying the silence that surrounded me. I was on edge, every sense heightened. I could hear the whispers again, but this time they weren't distant. They were close, too close, like they were inside my head. As I turned a corner, I stumbled upon something that made my stomach turn. It was a room, hidden in the farthest corner of the basement. The door was cracked open, and I could see faint light coming from inside. My pulse quickened as I approached, the door creaking as I pushed it open. The room was small, but it felt like it was much larger than it actually was. The walls were lined with strange symbols that I didn't recognize. They seemed to pulse with a faint energy, like they were alive, and in the center of the room was an altar. I hesitated before stepping closer. There was something off about it, something ancient and wrong. The air around the altar felt thick, charged with an energy I couldn't explain. I stepped closer, the unease growing inside me, but I couldn't turn away. On the altar were old, tattered books, open to pages filled with more symbols, and in the center, a large black stone. I reached out for it, my fingers trembling as I brushed the surface. The moment I touched it, everything changed. The room seemed to shift. The walls warped, the symbols on the walls began to glow, and the whispers intensified, becoming screams in my mind. I felt my body freeze, trapped in the grip of whatever power the hotel had over me. I tried to pull my hand away, but it was too late. The hotel's grip had tightened. The stone began to glow a sickly red, and the room seemed to pulse with an unnatural rhythm. The whispers stopped, and the silence was replaced with a voice, a deep, guttural voice that filled my mind and reverberated through my bones. "You should never have touched it," the voice boomed. "Now you are bound to us forever." I felt the ground beneath me shift, as if the very foundation of the hotel was shifting, molding, changing. I stumbled back, my heart racing, but the room was already closing in on me. The walls seemed to close together, the space growing smaller, suffocating. I couldn't breathe. The hotel had claimed me. There was no turning back. I had crossed the final line. I had touched the heart of the hotel, and now I was its prisoner. The room closed in around me, and the weight of it was unbearable. The stone I had touched pulsed in my hands, a slow, rhythmic beat that matched the pounding of my heart. My breath came in ragged gasps, as if the very air itself was pulling me down, dragging me deeper into the grip of whatever force held this place together. I stumbled backward, my mind reeling from the voice I had heard, the deep, guttural words that felt as though they came from the very core of the hotel. "You are bound to us forever." The words echoed in my mind like a dark prophecy I couldn't escape. My hands shook violently as I tried to pull myself together. I needed to think. I needed to figure out what to do next, but every thought seemed to slip away like smoke, vanishing into the air. The basement was no longer just a room. It was a living, breathing entity, its pulse vibrating through every inch of the space. The walls seemed to move, to bend, as if the hotel itself was alive, hungry, and watching me. I felt the pressure in my chest growing heavier, each breath becoming more labored, as if the hotel was squeezing the life out of me. I couldn't think straight. The panic was suffocating, and the shadows in the corners of the room seemed to stretch toward me, reaching for my very soul. I had thought the hotel was just an eerie, decaying place, but now I realized the truth. It was a living thing. An ancient force that thrived on fear, on despair, and I was its latest victim. I took a step toward the altar, the stone still glowing faintly in my hand, its heat searing my palm. The room seemed to hum with energy, and the air smelled of decay and dust, but beneath that there was something sweeter, something like old, forgotten promises, the faintest hint of something familiar, something I couldn't quite place. I looked down at the stone. Its surface was smooth, polished, but I could see something faint beneath it, something etched into its core. Symbols, not the same ones on the walls, but something older, something darker. The glow intensified, and I felt my body tremble as the whispers grew louder in my head, filling the space with their haunting, indecipherable language. Suddenly, I was no longer standing alone. The shadows in the corners of the room seemed to shift, forming shapes, figures. They were people, faces I recognized. Faces I had seen in the photographs, in the records, the same hollow-eyed, vacant stares. They were watching me now, standing in the room with me, as though they had been waiting for me to arrive. My body went cold, my breath caught in my throat. They were real. They weren't just images. They were here, trapped just like I was. They had been trapped by the hotel's rules, bound to it forever. And now I understood. The hotel didn't just take you, it kept you. It held you, locked you in this perpetual state of torment and isolation. The figure I had seen before. The man in the mask appeared in front of me again. This time his expression was colder, more detached. There was no emotion in his eyes, only the same hollow void I had seen in the others. He didn't speak immediately. He just watched me, his gaze like ice, and for the first time I realized something that made my stomach turn. He wasn't just a figure. He was a part of the hotel. He was one of the souls who had broken the rules, one of the ones who had been trapped. And now, he's here to make sure I didn't escape. "You've come to understand," he said finally, his voice hollow and distant. "But understanding doesn't set you free. No one is free here, not anymore." I tried to speak, to ask him what this place was, why it was doing this, but the words caught in my throat. The hotel didn't want me to understand. It didn't want me to leave. It wanted me to stay, to join the others in its endless, suffocating grasp. "You'll be like them." The man continued, his voice almost mournful now. "Just another face in the pictures, another soul trapped here forever." The room around me seemed to tilt, the walls closing in. The figures, those hollow-eyed people, stepped closer, their presence suffocating, pressing in on me like I was being swallowed whole. Their eyes were empty, but I could feel them watching me, judging me. They were the ones who had failed to follow the rules, and now they were here. Trapped for all eternity, and soon I would be too. The stone in my hand burned hotter, and I heard the whispers again. Louder now, their voices weren't in my head anymore. They were all around me, filling the room with their desperate pleas, their cries for release. But there was no release, there was no escape. "You can't fight it," the man in the mask said, his voice like a final verdict. "You're already part of it, you'll never leave." I tried to speak again, to beg for answers. But my words were drowned out by the growing roar in my ears. Walls felt like they were closing in faster now. The figures around me closed the distance, their faces getting closer, their hollow eyes following me. I turned to run, but the shadows reached out, grabbing me, pulling me back. The stone in my hand pulsed violently like a heartbeat. I screamed, but no sound came out. I was suffocating, trapped in a space that seemed to stretch on forever. The whispers filled my mind, drowning me, suffocating me. "You're one of us now." They whispered, their voices cold and harsh. "You'll never leave." I struggled, but there was no use. The darkness swallowed me whole, and I realized too late that the hotel had already won. I had crossed the final line. I had broken the rules, and now there was no way out. I don't know how much time passed after I was swallowed by the darkness. My body pulled into the suffocating grip of the hotel. Everything felt like a blur, as though time itself had stopped, or perhaps it had folded in on itself. The crushing weight of the hotel's presence pressed down on me, drowning out everything else. The voices, the whispers, the cold, empty eyes of those who had come before me, all of it was overwhelming. But even in the deepest pit of despair, a part of me refused to give in completely. My mind raced, trying to find a way out, to find something, anything that could break this cycle. But the more I fought against it, the more I realized the horrible truth. There was no escape. This hotel didn't just trap people, it consumed them. It absorbed them into its very fabric, like a parasite feeding on those foolish enough to cross its threshold. The people in the photographs, the ones in the basement, the ones who had once smiled and laughed in front of the hotel, they were gone, lost to the same curse that now held me. I wanted to scream. I wanted to cry out and beg for mercy, but my voice had been stolen from me. It was as if the hotel had taken everything, my will, my identity, my ability to fight back. I was nothing more than another prisoner, another broken soul whose name would be lost in the hotel's dark history. But even as I stood there, consumed by the hopelessness of it all, a thought flickered in my mind, an ember of defiance. Was I truly without hope? Had I really lost everything? Could I really accept this fate, knowing that I was about to become one of the countless lost souls wandering the halls, bound by the hotel's cruel rules for eternity? I had to do something. I couldn't let it end like this. I closed my eyes, and I remembered the letter I had found, the one that spoke of the rules. The one that warned me, do not break the rules or you will never leave. The rules were the key. I had already broken them, but that didn't mean it was over. I had to face it head on. I had to confront the heart of this place. Slowly, I opened my eyes again, and the darkness around me seemed to shift. The walls of the hotel, once solid and unyielding, began to tremble. The air grew heavier with each passing second, the pulse of the hotel growing stronger. It was as though the building itself was watching me, waiting for me to make the next move. I walked forward, uncertain but determined. I had no plan. I had no idea what would happen next, but I knew I had to try. I couldn't let the hotel take me, not like this. The hallway stretched out before me, dark and oppressive. The shadows seemed to pulse as if they were alive, reaching out for me. But I pushed forward, ignoring the fear gnawing at my insides. I walked past the rooms, past the photographs, past the memories of those who had fallen before me. At the end of the hall, I saw it, the door to the lobby. The place where it all began, the place where the cycle started. It wasn't just a door, it was the final barrier, the threshold I had crossed when I first arrived. And I knew that beyond it, I would find what I was looking for, the answers, the truth. I reached for the handle, my heart pounding in my chest. The moment my hand touched the cool metal, the air around me seemed to change. The whispers grew louder, more frantic. The temperature dropped even further. I could feel the pressure building, like the entire hotel was holding its breath, waiting to see what I would do. I pushed the door open. It creaked as it swung wide, and I stepped through. The lobby was just as I remembered it, but it was different now. It felt more oppressive, more alive. The shadows in the corners seemed to reach toward me, and the air was thick with the weight of the hotel's power. But there was something else now, something I couldn't put my finger on, a crack in the illusion. A glimpse of the truth hiding beneath the surface. I walked deeper into the room, but something caught my eye. The desk, once an innocuous feature of the lobby, now seemed to hold a hidden significance. It was as if it was calling me, drawing me in. I approached it, my heart racing, and I saw the familiar note, the same note I had seen earlier in the basement. The rules are not just to control you, they are to protect you, and when you break them, give up your right to leave. I had been wrong. It wasn't about surviving the rules, it was about understanding them. The hotel wasn't just a prison, it was a force, one that could be bent, shaped, controlled. The rules were its foundation. The only way to break free was to understand that foundation and break it from within. The figure in the mask had known. He was a part of it, bound by the same curse. But now I had the power, I had the knowledge. I placed my hand on the desk, feeling the energy pulse beneath my fingers. The hotel shook, its foundation rumbling beneath my feet. And for the first time, I felt the walls of the hotel loosen their grip on me. The rules were breaking, and I was free.